Hey everybody, welcome back. This is the second video in our training workshop called Mastering the Art of Communication. I want to welcome everyone back. I hope you got a whole lot out of the first video. If you haven't seen the first video, I recommend that you go back and look at it. Um, I'll have a link to the first video down below. And for those of you who have had the first video, let's go ahead and get started with this. What we've covered so far in our first video, we did a brief course overview. We covered basics in communication. We looked at a lot of barriers to communication that we need to develop strategies to deal with. We grew our own self-awareness, which, as you know, if you attended that first session, I feel is the most important part of all professional development. We learned how to ask really effective questions, and we learned about how to be a better listener. And so we've covered a whole lot of ground. And in this session, we're going to cover communication styles. We're going to cover body language, how to create a positive self-image. We're going to learn how to eliminate judgment. We're going to learn techniques for the workplace, and we're going to learn about assertiveness. I have a few reminders from our last video to get us started with this one. If you haven't already done so, I highly recommend you download and print out the student manual. It's 116 pages of narrative and activities. If you already did this during the first video, that's fine. It covers both of the videos, so you don't have to download it again. But if you haven't downloaded it yet, I recommend that you do so right now. And if you get value from this training, which I'm sure you're going to, I would like you to subscribe to the channel and like the video and share it, especially with people who you think would get a real benefit out of this. People who would value having better communication skills. It would help them be better professionals. If you know people like this, be sure and share it with them. And then a request to everyone to keep this channel ad-free. I do accept donations. So if you get something of value out of this, I ask you to support the channel. If you haven't already done so, I want to remind you of the gifts that I give to those who donate. For any donation, $10, $15, $20, I'll give the Disc Plus, which is a personality profile that I've integrated into this training. So if you take this, you're going to get a lot more out of the training, and you're going to learn to put the insight that you get from personality assessments like this to use. This is a $197 value. I'm going to give it to you in exchange for any donation that you make. For those of you who can donate $67 or more, I also give the Attribute Index, which is a far more powerful assessment than the Disc Plus. And I will also invite you to a live Zoom webinar where we'll go over all of these and learn how to apply them to not only your communication skills, but to developing your personal brand and a lot more things. So let's go ahead and get right into this. We're going to start with communication styles. And this is going to be a session that will really include a lot about the personality assessments. We're going to learn a lot about how to apply the personality assessments into learning about our own communication style, and also how to learn the communication style of others. And the first thing about communication styles we want to talk about is dichotomies. So I'm sure you've heard the phrase, there are two kinds of people, people who like the Ravens and people who like the Steelers. People who go to college and people who get a job right out of high school. People who want to go to the mountains and people who want to go to the beach. We call these comparisons dichotomies. It represents sort of two extremes. And we can identify differences among groups of people by these pairs of opposites, these dichotomies that we that we can develop. And so I want to get you to get used to the words dichotomies. Dichotomies are used in personality assessments all the time. So let's start talking about dichotomies in terms of some activities that'll help you develop more insight into them. Go to your workbook and start with the activity called Dichotomies in Theory. And answer these questions. Do you prefer to receive direct communication, which is the words that we say, or indirect communication, how we say it? So these are two dichotomies, direct and indirect communication. And then further explore, why do you feel this way, and what's your preferred way to communicate with others? So at this point, I want you to pause the video and then come back after you're done with this activity, and we'll move forward. So go ahead and pause. Okay. For my own benefit, I prefer direct communication. I have trained myself to be responsive to indirect communication, but I prefer a direct approach myself. Anybody who's been with me for any length of time will point out, you can, be very direct in your communication. You can be very blunt. And it all depends on what I think the situation needs. Most of the time, I'm working with a group of people who need some real direct communications. And I find that in being direct, it helps keep people engaged. It helps keep their attention. And when I'm doing a group training, that's really important. And this is not only my preferred way to communicate with others, but I also like to receive direct communication. I like for people to be very direct with me. It's a lot easier for me to engage in a discussion if they are. Here are some of the advantages of the direct mode of communication. First of all, people easily understand what you're saying, and I strive to be understood in my communications. You don't waste time being sensitive about others' feelings. Now, we just went through a few sessions in the previous video where we talked about it being very important that you be able to detect the emotions of others. And that still holds true. But what we're talking about here is the advantages of the direct mode of communication. So just with looking at the direct mode, that is definitely an advantage. And also, you're more likely to produce a desired change in behavior the more direct that you are. But there are some stark disadvantages to the direct mode of communication. People who use direct mode all the time can come across as being very rude and impatient. And the listener may reject your feedback because they feel you're unfairly focusing on only one part of their behavior. Your honest feedback and straightforward language might hurt the other listener's feelings, and it may damage your relationship with the other person. Okay? So this is a degree of self-management that you have to use. Understanding that how to take the advantages of the direct mode and how to manage the disadvantages of the direct mode so that they don't become barriers to your communication. Now, some advantages to the indirect mode is you will not alienate too many of your listeners if you use it. You'll appear to be sensitive and considerate, or you might genuinely be sensitive and considerate, and you will balance constructive feedback about undesired behavior with praise for desirable behavior. But there are some disadvantages. First of all, listeners may not understand what point you're trying to make. You might be speaking vaguely instead of in concrete terms. People may misunderstand your message altogether. And listeners may exploit a vague message for their personal benefit. In other words, they will take their beliefs and their biases and their filters and sort of mold the message in a way that benefits them without listening to really what you're trying to impart. Now, this is a very busy chart, and it's a recreation of the list of dichotomies that is in this activity in your workbook. And I'm not going to go through each one of these right now, but what this is a list of dichotomies. For instance, abstract versus concrete, I know people who are very abstract thinkers. I know people who are very concrete thinkers. I know people who are abstract communicators and very concrete communicators. What I want you to do in this activity is you only have to pick three of them that really resonate with you, three that you encounter maybe on a regular basis, and list the advantages and disadvantages or examples of each side of the dichotomy. Okay, so pause the video, do this activity, and then when we come back, I'll give you some of my feedback on some of these. Okay, hopefully that activity really got you thinking about not only the dichotomies themselves, but people who you feel like display those dichotomies. For my purposes, abstract versus concrete, as I've said, is one that I see a whole lot. There's a lot of benefit in being an abstract thinker. Abstract thinkers tend to be able to produce really big ideas, big transformational ideas. Concrete thinkers tend to come up with more practical, focused ideas. And there's a benefit to each. There's a time and a place for each. And I've learned how abstract thinkers might have issues when it comes to the practical and getting things done, especially. Whereas concrete thinkers tend to stick with what they know works, and it's harder to get them to think outside the box. By the same token, because I do a lot of strategic development, big picture versus details comes up a lot in what I do. Big picture thinkers tend to be more strategic thinkers, the 30,000-foot view. They tend to be more visionary, and they tend to be able to produce tangible goals that are related to achieving a vision. The more detail-focused people tend to gravitate more towards the implementation of those goals, doing the day-to-day things that need to be done in order to move the organization forward. And if you ask them to think of the big picture, it sort of pulls them out of their comfort zone. Just as if you ask the big picture thinker to work on something that is more detail related, more day-to-day related, it pulls them in an area they don't really want to go. Something that I hope you're going to see about these dichotomies is that they complement one another. You need both of them. You need people who are more abstract thinkers and people who are more concrete thinkers. You need people who are looking at the big picture, and you need people who are more focused on the details. So I hope you were able to find three that really resonate with you. So tell me, how difficult was it to come up with positive points about the side you personally dislike? And how hard was it to come up with negative points about the side that you personally like? If you gravitate towards one or the other, it might be very hard to be objective. But believe me, there are positives and negatives associated with each one of those dichotomies. Which do you think was easier, making a case for a side or making a case against a side? Which dichotomy was the most difficult for you to think about and prepare your case for? Think about that. And also, did you get some new insights as a result of this activity? Which of these insights occurred during the preparation time? Which ones occurred while listening to others or thinking about things after you were done? Okay? These are things to think about with regard to this. Dichotomies, being able to use dichotomies will really help you, especially as you're interacting in a team environment, in an organizational environment. Just be aware that there are going to be people who display the extremes on each one of those dichotomies, but we need all of those dichotomies in order to make the organization work well. Now I want to get a little bit more focused on personality assessments and how they relate to your communication style. The three assessments that I work with, the two that are in the DISC Plus are the DISC assessment and the values index. And those look at how you behave and what motivates you. And then the third is the attribute index, which looks at how you think, your thinking attributes. So the DISC assessment looks at how you communicate. The values index looks at why you communicate. And the attribute index looks at what you communicate. So each one of them has a bearing on your communication style. We're going to focus primarily on the DISC assessment and its associated behaviors, because behaviors are the things that we notice about one another first. So this is one of the things that I pulled up during the first workshop, the 4 dimensions of the DISC assessment. This version uses decisive, interactive, stabilizing, and cautious. And there's some dichotomies that are associated with each one of these. If you've taken the DISC, if you contributed to the site, and you took the DISC assessment and looked at the report, on page 8 of the DISC Plus assessment, you will see this table that lays out sort of a continuous variation between 2 dichotomies for each one of these. And the dichotomies associated with the decisive dimension, high Ds, people with a high D score tend to be more demanding. People with a low D score tend to be more deliberate. People with a high interactive I score tend to be more gregarious. People with a low I score tend to be more introspective. People with a high S score, stabilizing, tend to be more patient. People with a low S score tend to be more spontaneous. And then finally, people with a high C score for cautious tend to be more cautious. No surprise there. People with a lower C score tend to be more challenging. So as you can see, there are dichotomies there. And you know people who display these behaviors at the either extreme in your organization. Now, there's an associated communication style for each one of these, and I'm going to talk about the high scores because those are the ones that tend to stand out the most. High Ds, people with a high D score, tend to be more results-oriented, and they want a quick solution. They are very aggressive, assertive problem solvers. They tend to be more argumentative, because they see that problem as an obstacle to them getting results, and they want to deal with it as quick as they can. They might appear to be overpowering in their communication. They like to win, and they might show up unprepared. Okay? So this is what you can expect when you are communicating with a high D. When you're communicating with a high I, you'll notice that they are more social and people-oriented. Their communications lack attention to detail. They might tend to say more abstract things. They may overpromise with the hopes that things will work out in the end. They tend to be very talkative and enthusiastic, and their communication tends to be wordy, and sometimes they're somewhat illogical in how they convey themselves. The high S is marked by sort of a lack of emotion. So they tend to be very even-tempered individuals. Their communication is very personable. You know, you're going to like interacting with a high S. They're very steady and dependable. They tend to be kind of slower paced. You might expect them to listen more than they talk, at least initially. They like to achieve harmony. So the things that they talk about have a goal of achieving a harmonious end. They may overuse facts. And they tend to be non-emotional in their communication. They feel the same emotion as anyone else, but they tend to more internalize it than express it. The high C, they really know the data. So they will communicate in terms of facts and figures and things like that. They may over-evaluate. Coming up with alternatives is a mark of a high C. So they will show you that they have evaluated these alternatives. They tend not to show enthusiasm. It's sort of just the facts, please. They're very quality focused and precise individuals. They tend to be very well organized, and they're analytical to a fault. One of the things that you're going to notice about their communication as it relates to change is that the high Ds and the high Is tend to be more open to the big transformational changes. The high S and the high C tend to be more open to the smaller incremental changes. So this might have a profound impact on how they communicate with you and how they communicate with one another. So let's take a look at a real world example. This is a person who I recently profiled, and you can see that their two highest preferences here are the S, the stabilizing behavior, and the C, the cautious behavior. And these are the two things that relate to their communication style most directly. So what is this person's natural communication style? I want you to pause the video and see maybe if you can figure out how to determine this by what we looked at in the last chart. So pause the video. Okay, if you were able to figure this out, great. If not, I'm going to show you right now. So the solution is, as I said, this person displays a high S and a high C. The high S means that they are, as we said, personable, steady and dependable, slower paced. They like to achieve harmony. They may overuse facts and non-emotional. The high C means that they know the data. They may over-evaluate. They tend not to show enthusiasm. They're very quality focused and precise. They're well organized and they're analytical to a fault. And this is from whence they will display their communication style. Their communication style will sort of be a combination of these two factors. You will notice these things at work at various times during their communication. So knowing this, it's kind of easier to determine how to communicate with them more effectively, because they're going to want to hear this out of you. Not only are they going to want to convey this to you, but they're going to want to hear this from you. So based on what we just looked at, for those of you who have taken the DISC Plus profile, I want you to pull up your DISC score, the score for each one of these, and I want you to relay and develop and relay your natural communication style. Look to where you have high scores. You might have one high score, you might have two high scores, some of you might even have three high scores. And come up with what you feel your natural communication style is based on these things that you see here on this screen. So pause your video if you've taken this and do this activity. If you have not taken the DISC, feel free to move on. So for those of you who had, just pause the video and then we'll move forward. Okay, I hope you got a lot out of that. That is it is a very important step when you are trying to develop self-awareness and insight to look at your natural communication style, because this is what others see in you first. When somebody looks at you, they're going to see how you behave. If you're sitting in a meeting, they will be able to observe these things about you as you interact with other people. And it's important for them to understand you just as it's important for you to understand them. So using this insight, we can now develop communication strategies. So let's say that you didn't know the DISC results for someone. Let's say that you just had interacted with them enough to notice some things about how they behave. You can use that insight to estimate their behaviors in all four of them. For instance, if you're trying to figure out their D score, let's look at how they display their emotions. Are they quick to anger with a short fuse or slow to anger with a long fuse? If it's quick to anger, they're probably high D. If it's slow to anger, they're probably a low D. In the interactive dimension, the emotion there is optimism or trust. So do they tend to be optimistic, positive, and trusting, or pessimistic and skeptical? If it's optimistic, they're probably a high I. If it's pessimistic, they're probably a low I. In the stabilizing dimension, they tend to be non-emotional. So are they hard to read, or do they show whatever they feel? If they're harder to read, that's probably a high S. If they show whatever they feel, it's probably a low S. And then finally, cautious. They're looking at, we're looking for the emotion of fear. So do they respect rules and do things really by the book? Or do they break rules and they're more of a freewheeler? If they respect the rules, they're probably high C. If they break the rules, they're probably a low C. If you can't tell these things about them, if you can't look at these dichotomies and tell things about them, then their scores are probably in the middle. Maybe they're not observable. And what you really need to determine is the high scores and the low scores in order to communicate with them properly. The ones that are in the middle, maybe not so much. So let's take a couple of people that you know. Go to your workbook. I've got a space for you in the workbook to write down the names of 2 people that you know well enough to do this sort of analysis with. Estimate their D, I, S, and C based on these highs and lows. And if you can't, if you can't do a certain one, just skip it. If you can't, if you can't tell, for instance, if they're optimistic or pessimistic, their score might be in the middle. So that's something that you really can't tell. Just focus on the ones that you can readily tell. You should be able to get 1 or 2 of them at least. So go ahead, pause the video, and when you're done with this, we'll move forward. Okay, I hope you got a lot out of that. This is a really powerful tool. It's not hard to use. It's very effective in estimating the behaviors of people that you know in order to come up with a communication strategy for them. Now, these next charts are reprinted in your workbook, so I'm not going to go through them, but they are they're very much the same format-wise. The first column gives you the characteristics of that high behavior, and the second column says this is how you craft your communication strategy in order to blend with them better. So as an example, high D is more competitive, so they want to be number 1. So in your communication, to appeal to that, you show them how to win. Give them new opportunities. Show them how these new opportunities are going to make them, more of a winner, more being number 1. They tend to think logically, so you display your reasoning in your communication. They want all the facts and highlights, so you provide concise data, and so on and so forth. So this is a very powerful list of characteristics, and then what to do knowing those characteristics. So here's the same for communicating with a high I. Here's an example. They think emotionally, so support their feelings in your communications whenever possible. They want to know the general expectations, so avoid involved details. Focus on the big picture. High I's tend to be big picture thinkers. They often need help getting organized, so try to do things together with them. Work through things together. The high S's tend to think logically, so show your reasoning. They want documentation and facts, so give them data and proof. And then show how your ideas minimize risk, because that's what they're going to want to hear. They're more concerned with overall stability. Then finally, communicating with a high C. You want to approach them in an indirect, non-threatening way, because they tend to shy away from aggressive approaches. Again, they think logically, so show your reasoning. They want to see your data. They want you to show your work. So give them the data that you used to come up with your recommendation in writing. And since they're very process-oriented, give them explanations and rationale. Show them your process, the process that you used. Now, these are all reprinted in your workbook, and so it's going to be a great resource for you, a great reference. This activity is taking the person who we've looked at now twice and develop a strategy to communicate with this person. Okay? So again, they're high S and they're high C. I want you to pause the video right now, develop a strategy using those 4 sheets that we just went through. Then when you come back, I'll explain to you how I would go about doing it. So pause your video now, and then we'll come back. Okay, that's great. This was a real practical, effective application for all this insight that we learned in the previous tables. And here's how I would go about doing it. I would, this person again is the high S and high C. I would look up the guidance for the high S and the high C, and then I would integrate the guidance into a cohesive strategy depending on what the purpose of the communication was. Am I trying to persuade them? Am I giving them a recommendation based on looking at some alternatives? I would pick out the factors, and then I would also sort of give it a sanity check by looking at, what do I know about this person? Does this really apply to this person? Is this person a high D as a high D? Are they probably, are they really that competitive? You know, give it a sanity check so that you'll know whether or not your particular strategy is going to work with them. And over time, you'll learn which of the factors is most important to the person, and you can refine your approach. Okay? So I hope you are able to put those tables to good use. They're very effective. Now we're going to move into the section on body language. I want to point out this research from Dr. Maribian. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name. But when discussing emotions, 7% of the speaker's message is communicated by words, 38% by tone of voice, and 55% by body language. Have you ever gotten an email that it appears to you that you're being chewed out? I've gotten those before. What the person is conveying it seems like by their choice of words that they're angry and that they're really letting you have it. But the words alone don't really convey it. If you were face to face with them, you might get a totally different message from them because the tone of voice and body language are absent in that email. And this is why I was complaining so much about using email during the first video. It does not convey the complete picture. So even in other conversations, we know that tone of voice and body language have a large impact in those messages. So what I'm going to advise you to do is to pick up cues from people when you feel that you're making them uncomfortable, and then adjust your approach. This is sort of real-time communication management using body language as the trigger. You take one step back or get the other person to talk instead, and then people will be more at ease and open with you. Okay? This is a technique that you can learn to use in all of your communication. The more that you let others talk, the less this will become an issue. But when you detect that the things you're saying are making people uncomfortable, you can adjust your approach and mitigate that and manage it. And you'll become better at this the more that you use it as a communication tool. People send you a lot of signals, and this is conveyed in a chart that is in your workbook through facial expressions, eye contact, hand and arm gestures, body postures, clothing, physical space, voice characteristics, and status symbols. With regard to gestures, we all interpret body language differently, and we can also feel differently about images. We're influenced by past experience, background, culture, and so on. A gesture is a type of nonverbal communication that's communicated through body language with or without speech. And if you travel around the world or work with people from different cultures, you need to be aware of the multiple meanings to some gestures. I'm going to share with you some big mistake that I made back in the 90s. I was working in an organization that had some international clients. And at the time, I was suffering from arthritis. And I had some really bad arthritis in my hips. And as a result, to take strain off my hips, I got used to putting my feet up on my desk. It would really make my hips feel better. Well, I got an unannounced visit from a couple of our foreign visitors, and these happened to be from Saudi Arabia. What I didn't know really hurt our conversation. And as a matter of fact, they got up and left while we were having our conversation. And what I found out later was the fact that I had my feet up on the desk, I was showing them my heels. And because I was showing them my heels, they viewed that as a sign of disrespect. It was a sign of disrespect in their culture. So I ended up having to apologize to them and explain why I kept my feet up on the desk. And it was a learning experience for me. And I've started to understand how my body language can be interpreted by different people in different cultures differently. So there's an activity on gestures. There's an illustration. And I want you to interpret what is being conveyed by each of the gestures that people are taking here. So go ahead and pause the video. When you come back, we'll move forward. Okay. Hopefully you were able to get some really good insight about this. And it will make you more aware and observant of people's gestures and imparting a meaning to them, getting a meaning from them. We're going to move into a session on creating a positive self-image. And you've heard the expression that first impressions are everything. So when people meet you for the first time, they're going to make assumptions and judgments about you based on how you present yourself. And there are 7 things that people can determine or tend to determine or try to determine from your appearance, for better or for worse. Income, education level, social position, sophistication, success, moral character, and trustworthiness. Now, is this fair? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Maybe people rely too much on first impressions and don't take the time to get to know you. And even though you might have not give a good first impression, if they do get to know you, some of these barriers might be overcome in time. But it's important to understand that they will make some judgments about you based on your appearance. And you have the ability to control and manage that. So let's do a little bit of self-evaluation regarding this. Pause the video after we go through this and do this activity in your workbook. Have you ever tried to wear your hair in a different way? Do your glasses allow for good eye contact? Do people notice your jewelry? Are people distracted by your clothing or jewelry? Do you organize the clothes in your closet so that they are coordinated for easy dressing in the morning? Are you always neatly groomed? And then list 3 habits about your dress and appearance that you want to enhance, strengthen, or eliminate, and write your plan to achieve these changes. So pause the video, and then we will move forward after you've completed this activity. Okay, I hope you got a lot out of that. I want to really make you aware of these factors, especially as they pertain to making a good first impression. If you make a good first impression, communication then becomes a lot easier because you will not have as many barriers to get around, preconceived notions and biases to get around as a result. And speaking of these preconceived notions and biases, we're moving now into a session that is focused on eliminating judgment. Okay? So to start off, we're going to talk about frame of reference. Everyone has a frame of reference. It's a way in which we judge other people. And in order to really get the meaning of what's going on, we need to be able to suspend those judgments. So you need to be able to broaden or modify your frame of reference in order to be a good communicator. What is your frame of reference? It's made up of your beliefs, your assumptions, your values, your feelings, your judgments, your emotions, the advice that people have given you, what kind of moods you're in, your thoughts, your biases, and your stress levels at any given moment. So your frame of reference is a complex beast. And in order to manage it, you need to be aware of these things and how they're affecting your thinking and your behavior in order to be an effective communicator. So here's how to try to do this. Here's how to manage yourself better in this area. First of all, we've talked about putting yourself in other people's shoes and showing empathy. So put others before yourself. Put yourself in their shoes. That will help you with your frame of reference in regards to your communications with them. Check things out before jumping to conclusions, making assumptions, or reacting emotionally. Okay? And give others the benefit of the doubt. Your communication should be a way of confirming that you were right in giving them the benefit of the doubt. As we've talked about before, personality assessments can really help your general team awareness. When you take personality assessments in a group, it eliminates 80% of the preconceptions and judgments that you may have about one another. And it's because, first of all, you instantaneously understand them and they understand you. If you're in a workshop where you're taking personality assessments and you're able to look at one another's assessments, you will recognize things about them that you see in them and why that they're there. One of our judgments and biases about people who think and communicate differently than us is that maybe that it's not just that they're different, it's that they're different in a worse way. And sometimes you might even think, hey, they're just jerks. But a lot of times, these factors just come along with their personality traits. So if you understand them and they understand you, you can really get past the notion that they're jerks. You can start to understand the strengths that they bring to the team, and they can understand the strengths you bring to the team. And it clarifies differences in a non-judgmental way. Okay? It gives insight into one another's strengths, and it helps develop communication strategies. So just going through this type of workshop with a team raises your level of team awareness, and you get all of these spin-off benefits that make developing communication strategies that much easier. Okay, now this activity touches upon a lot of the things that we've talked about coming up to this point. So I want you to write down a single clear example that belongs to each one of these categories. Active listening behaviors, common communication mistakes, nonverbal language, communication dichotomies, ways in which people filter the messages they receive, purposes of communication, types of questions, types of written communication, and rules for effective speaking, writing, telephone calling, etc. Come up with a clear example that you're experienced with for each one of those. We'll pause the video here and do the activity, and then come back and we'll move on. Okay, this was sort of a review and a way of sort of putting everything together that we've talked about so far. I hope you got a lot out of that. Now, here are some strategies for you and techniques to use in the workplace so that you can become a better communicator tomorrow. These are things you can put to use immediately, whether or not anybody has had the personality assessments whether or not you know the people well enough to come up with your strategies. Here are some things that you can do tomorrow to make you a better communicator directly. First of all, prepare, prepare, prepare. Okay? Understand the purpose of your communication. Why are we communicating? What am I trying to get? Am I trying to get an answer, a decision? Am I trying to convey my recommendation, my solution? Understand what is your outcome? What is your desired outcome? Make sure the person who's going to receive your message is ready to receive it. And then apply positive intent. Say, this is going to be successful, and I know how to make it successful. So let's start putting this idea of positive intent to work. Okay? You've got some activities related to positive intent. And so let's test our theories out here. This first situation, your supervisor calls you to say that he has chosen someone else for a project team position that you were hoping for. You love your current job, but you know you would have done a great job on that project team yourself. So your first reaction is to be mad at your boss for being a jerk and not selecting you. So using positive intent, think of a reason your boss would have selected someone else. Pause the video and then we'll come back. Okay, were you able to come up with a good example of a reason that they might have selected somebody else using positive intent instead of thinking that they were a jerk? Maybe they felt like the person that they chose was a better fit for that team. Maybe he thought that the person they chose was had some strengths that they brought to the team that would have made them more successful. Your boss might have all sorts of reasons. And a good sort of follow-up for this is to ask, why did you select this person and not me? And then you get some insight. Maybe there are some things about you that you felt that after having this conversation, you can understand. Yeah, maybe I wasn't aware that they needed this type of person with this type of strengths and skills to participate. So maybe now I can be more ready in the future when these type of opportunities come up. Situation number 2. You are in a team meeting and you suggest a great solution to a problem. Your supervisor says that she cannot go in that direction and asks the team for other suggestions. So using positive intent, think of a reason your supervisor would have answered that way. Pause the video and then we'll come back and I'll give you my insights. Okay, this is actually something that happens fairly commonly in a team setting because a good team leader will seek input from the entire team as to what their recommendations are before making a decision. It's not always the goal of the team leader to seek consensus. They really want to make the best decision, and they've got their own criteria for making the decision. So if you've presented an idea or a suggestion or a solution, and the supervisor says, we can't go in that direction, there are many positive intent-related reasons that your supervisor might not have chosen it. You might not have supported your recommendation with enough facts and data. Think about this person if they were a high D or a high C. They might want to see a lot of facts and data to support. Maybe you weren't as clear on the results that the supervisor was trying to obtain and that you didn't emphasize, here's how we get to those results. Maybe you didn't show that you understood what the supervisor was trying to accomplish in your previous communications so that your suggestion confused your supervisor. There's all sorts of different reasons that it could be, other than that the supervisor doesn't trust your judgment or anything, or that they're being a jerk. Okay, so again, after this blows over, you can go in and talk and say, What was it about my suggestion that didn't turn you on, that didn't meet your requirements? And then you'll understand more about your supervisor. And in the future, you can come up with ways of giving your supervisor what they need better and more effectively. So now we're going to talk about delivering your message. Okay. We talked about direct language and indirect language earlier. So use direct language and deliver a message that is clear, calm, and direct. Okay. Factual descriptions and relevant details are more likely to be heard. Use repetition respectfully and to keep things on track. Be aware of your nonverbal messages as clearly as you are about your verbal messages. You might even try to have a nonverbal strategy. Things that you want to do during your communication in order to augment your verbal message. And then also check for understanding. Ask, does this make sense? Am I being clear? Do you have any questions? Make sure that they understand what you're presenting and proposing as you go through. Okay? This will help you in delivering your message more effectively. So now let's check for understanding. Here are some ways that we can check for understanding while we are delivering our message. What do you think about what I just said? Let's summarize what we've covered so far. Please tell me what you're thinking. Does this make sense? If you were going to share this with the team, what would you say? What is not making sense here? And these are just some examples. So I would like for you to write 3 ways that you could think that you can check for understanding in your communications. You can take one of these and modify it. You can write, if you like them just as they are, you can use them. If you want to come up with things that are totally new that you don't see on this list, you can do that. So pause the video and come up with 3 ways that you can check for understanding. Okay. The final part of this training deals with assertiveness. And assertiveness is something that you can convey in your communication. It's a way to make your communication more effective. You might not have, this might not have occurred to you, but because some of you may be more naturally assertive, like the high D's and the high I's might be naturally more assertive. The high S's and the high C's might be more non-assertive in their communications. So this is something for you to keep in mind and some things for you to learn about how assertiveness can make you a more effective communicator. So the first thing we're going to talk about is your self-attitude. Self-concept, self-image, and self-esteem can all impact the way we send and receive messages. It can impact all of our communications. So here are some words for you to watch out for in your communication. I will try, ought to, should have, must, always, and never. Okay? These are words to watch out for that can convey things about your self-attitude. In order to support your self-attitude, you should try to avoid these types of things. Also be aware of your inner self-talk. Be aware of the internal messages you give yourself. And try to be more positive with yourself. Replace your self-talk with more positive, confident words. And it's sometimes it's easier said than done, but it's worth the results. So this is something that you should be able to work on every day, is to manage your self-talk. Replace your self-talk with positive, confident words. We're now going to move into a subset of communication called persuasion. Persuasion occurs when you are making a recommendation to somebody that you want them to adopt. It occurs when you're trying to close a sale. You're trying to, when you're debating, when you're writing an editorial, you're trying to persuade people to take on your viewpoint or to take the action that you're recommending. So with regard to persuasion, you can definitely impact your inner self-talk positively by expecting the best, know when to stop talking. Have you ever known somebody who's talked so much that the other person stopped listening? So you need to know when to stop talking and balance enthusiasm with control. Now, this is a list of 30 ways to persuade. And I want you to use this as a reference. Some of these we've already gone through because in our techniques on questioning and listening, some of the spin-off results of them are, for instance, linking and connecting with individual clients. Okay. Another one here, demonstrate your expertise and knowledge. When I am doing these videos, one of my spin-off goals is to establish myself as an expert in the field of organizational development. In this case, in the field of communication skills. Always tell the truth. Okay. Know when to be silent. Practice diffusion. Show that you're out for the same things, that you've got a common goal. Never corner clients. Leave them a way out. Do not patronize them. Give sincere compliments when it's appropriate. Remember names. One of the first things that we said in our communication is get their name, write it down so that you can refer to it. I want you to use these all as a reference and use them to help develop your strategies. And to put this, take this to another level, your best persuasion strategies will be developed if you understand how to appeal to people at the value level. So people's values, the things that drive them, the things that they're passionate about, if you can appeal to what they're passionate about, you can really persuade them at a new level of success. And this is the second personality profile that is included in the DISC Plus, the Values Index. And it looks at 7 areas of personal motivation: the aesthetic, the economic, the individualistic, the political, the altruistic, the regulatory, and the theoretical. Okay? It is much harder to estimate these in a person unless you really, really know them that well. So knowing their values index scores would really help you in this arena. And there are ways that we can go about doing that in your team setting. That would be a follow-on conversation that we could have. But for this purpose, I'm going to go through each one of these. I'm going to give you a strategy to persuade someone who has a high motivator in that area. So the first one is the aesthetic, okay? The aesthetic dimension. If somebody is motivated by aesthetics, they want to achieve balance, harmony, and find form or beauty. And we find a lot of people with environmental or green concerns gravitating toward this motivator. So this list here, some of the things in the list: artistic expression, form over function, creativity, subjectivity, mutual respect. So when you're trying to persuade an aesthetic, use a lot of graphical presentations with harmonizing elements. Try to achieve balance. Try to show how your recommendation achieves balance. Highlight any environmental benefits if those are on the table, and show how your suggestion can bring order from chaos. Someone with an economic drive or an economic motivation, they get security from economic gain. They want to win. They want to win big financially. They're trying to achieve practical returns. You also find a lot of people in the financial industry that have this as a motivator. So they like to work with monetary figures and the numbers. So they're focused on practical returns, efficiency, utility, production. maximizing gains, delivering results. So focus your communication on the bottom line results achieved. Show the bottom line up front. Highlight the productivity and performance gains that your suggestion will result in. Show the return on investment and show how it enhances your margins and profitability. Now, an individualistic, I have this as one of my motivators. Somebody who's individual wants to be unique and independent and stand apart from the crowd. This is the drive to be socially independent and have an opportunity for freedom of personal expression. So they want to be unique, independent, autonomous, free, self-governed. They want to establish and promote their own personal brand. So focus on how your suggestion gives them the first mover advantage and differentiates their position. Show how it improves governance and aligns with their priorities and provides them greater freedom. You can even show how it can enhance their personal brand, what they'll get out of it personally that'll make them appear more unique and seen more as an expert. Someone with a political motivation wants to be in charge. They want to be a leader and they have to have influence and control. They tend to be competitive and they seek power, influence. They gravitate to leadership roles, authority. They tend to be very competitive and they like the status and esteem that comes with that increased responsibility. So show how your suggestions and recommendations enhance their position, enabling them to extend their influence, grow their market position, differentiate their offering, and increase their accountability. Okay? Someone with an altruistic motivator wants to put others' needs ahead of their own. That is the need to benefit others in a humanitarian sense. They want to give of their time, resources, and energy to help others. So show how your recommendation will improve their service levels, enhance their support networks, show the positive impact that your suggestions have on people, show how it can improve their staff experience, and give them the reassurance and help, because that's what they're really focused on. Somebody with a regulatory drive wants to establish order, routine, and structure. They generally need a lot of structure in their lives. They want to promote rules and policies. They want to establish traditional approaches and security through standards and protocols. They tend to be more systematic, more orderly, more traditional, more principled, more structured, and more focused. So focus on methods that are well proven and well established. Systematize solutions. Show how your recommendations eliminate error, enhance compliance, and bring order from chaos. And then finally, people with a theoretical motivation want to learn. They want to understand, gain knowledge, discover the truth. A lot of people with high theoretical scores will want to learn for the learning's sake, acquire knowledge for knowledge's sake. So rational thinking, problem solving, objective, fact-based, analyzing, clarifying, and they often have a real pride in their intellectual power. They have an ego associated with their intellect. So focus your presentation on how your problem discovery and analysis. How did you arrive at this? Provide relevant solutions and offer irrefutable evidence. Give your well-researched rationale and always be clarifying and confirming. Because a lot of times the big barrier there is going to be their intellect. And you're going to have to find ways to appeal to their intellect and their ego. So let's develop a strategy to persuade this person. They have a high theoretical drive and a high political drive. So using the information in your workbooks, come up with with a strategy to persuade this person. What would you use? How would you, what are the things that you would need to put in your presentation in order to persuade this person? So pause the video and then we'll come back. Okay, so here's the solution. Look at this. First of all, this person, as I said, they display a high theoretical and political drive, but they also display low altruistic and regulatory. So the first thing you want to do is look up the guidance for persuading a theoretical and persuading a political. Make sure those things are in your presentation. But since also they have low altruistic and regulatory, avoid doing the things associated with persuading an altruistic and persuading a regulatory. Make sure that your presentation is free of those things because they are looking for the opposite. This person, as a low regulatory, does not like structure. They like freedom. They like new and different. They're more adventurous. They can exist in an environment without structure. The low altruist score here means that they don't really care that much about helping others, okay? In order to help others, there needs to be another motivator at work. It may be that it'll help them learn more or help enhance their position. They're going to make their decisions based on their theoretical and political motivations. So use the guidance for those. Avoid doing the things associated with altruistic and regulatory. So there's a case study in your workbook called A Negative Image. So first of all, read the narrative about Marlene's experience, and then write down what steps you think Marlene would need to take. And then, do you think she will face obstacles in her quest for a more assertive style? And why might she succeed in that? So let's pause, and then we'll come back, and we will head down the straightaway here and cross the finish line. All right, let's move forward. We're in the home stretch here, so the assertiveness formula. Stick with our own thoughts, feelings, and beliefs and avoid direct or implied criticism of the other person. Okay? Stick with I messages expressed in a matter-of-fact, non-judgmental tone of voice. So if your message really is, you talk too loudly, the I form of that message is, I have sensitive hearing. If the you message is, you should send down an agenda, the I form of that message is, I'd like to know what we're going to discuss in the meeting tomorrow so I can bring the right information with me. Okay? It's the same message, but it is framed in such a way that is focused on what I need to succeed, not on you, your shortcomings, but what I need to succeed. So the assertiveness formula here that we're going to use is step 1, non-judgmentally describe a specific behavior of the other person. So when you do this, when you fail to send out an agenda. Step 2, describe as specifically as possible the effects this behavior is having or the practical problems it's causing in your life. So the effects are, I can't prepare myself for the meeting adequately. Okay? Then step 3, describe how you feel as a result without using the expression you make me. I feel a lot less prepared and a lot less able to contribute without an agenda. And then step 4, describe what you want, preferably after you give the other person a chance to state what they think might be done. I prefer or would like to receive an agenda at least 24 hours in advance so that I can adequately prepare. So do you see how that works? When you do this, the effects on me are this, and then it makes me feel like this. So I would prefer, would like you to do this. Very easy, very straightforward. There are going to be times that you will need to express your no. Okay? And there are many ways to say no. One is to say no, firm and calmly. End of discussion. Another is to say no, followed by a straightforward explanation of why you feel that way or what you are willing to do. A third is to say no and then give a choice or alternative. I like that one. A fourth is to say no and then clarify your reasons. In clarifying your reasons, you might give them the opportunity to come back with an alternative that you might say yes to. Use your natural no. Make an empathetic listening statement and then say no. I understand what you're trying to achieve, but, and then give your no. Say yes and then give your reasons for not doing it or your alternative solution. Yeah, I can do this, but I can't do it today. I can have it ready for you by 4 p.m. tomorrow. Okay? So there are many ways of saying no in a constructive way that leads to a better outcome. Sometimes you're going to have to give a persistent response to someone who is very aggressive or manipulative. These people may present themselves as not wanting to take no for an answer. So you need to select a concise one-sentence statement and repeat it no matter what the other person says or does. Okay, this is part of your assertive response. I understand how you feel, but I'm not willing to, etc. I'm not interested, etc. I don't want to, etc. I'm uncomfortable doing that, so I don't want to, etc. You might be right, but I'm not interested. Be very persistent with this. Okay? This is how you deal with someone who seemingly won't take no for an answer. You need to match their aggressiveness with your persistence. So say your no statement firmly, calmly, and as unemotionally as possible. Be aware of your non-verbal behavior and be persistent. So we have just crossed the finish line. We've gone through 12 sessions. And to wrap up, let's go over our learning objectives one more time. Identify common communication problems that may be holding you back. We did that. We learned how to define our communication style. We developed skills to ask questions that give you the information you need to be more effective and to give them the solutions they're looking for. We learn what your nonverbal messages are telling others and how to manage that. We developed skills to listen actively and empathetically to others. We enhanced your ability to handle difficult situations, and we've learned to deal with situations assertively. So we've hit all the check boxes here. We've accomplished everything that I wanted you to learn. Hopefully, we've accomplished everything that you wanted to learn. You might have questions after this. Again, in your comments, feel free to ask questions. Also, let me know how long it took you to get through this with all the activities and everything. Again, this was an entire day's worth of workshop that we did. And it took me almost an hour and 15 minutes just doing it this way. But in a workshop environment, I'd be doing this and having lots of discussions and activities that would increase the amount of participation, but increase the length. So hopefully with your using this, going at your own pace, you were able to achieve this, very directly. Hopefully it didn't take you longer than 2 or 3 hours, but I would really like to know about how long it took you with all the pauses and everything. So in order to put all of this to use, I recommend practice, practice, practice. Practice your questioning, practice your listening, practice your communication styles, practice understanding the communication styles of others. Prepare for all of your communications. Develop your strategies. Use that section on developing your communication strategies. Contribute a little bit to the site, and you can take that profile and boom, you'll have an invaluable tool in helping you come up with communication strategies and then giving others the strategy to communicate with you. Seek out situations to apply these techniques every single day. Remember your why. Remember why you're communicating. Remember what you're trying to accomplish. Ensure your communications add value to others. Ensure that you're going to make them more successful with your communications. And use your workbook as a reference book. There's lots of good information in that book. Use it to look things up, especially when it, regarding those questions, the probing questions, the 3 levels of inquiry. Put those to use. Find ways to use those every single day. The more you use them, the better you will be. And the more you practice and prepare and develop your strategies, the better communicator you will be. So remember, if you got value from this training, subscribe to my channel, like the video, and share it with the people who you feel would also get a value from it. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you got a lot out of this. I truly appreciate those who took the time to go through both videos, and I wish you luck and success. And if you'd like to contact me for any reason, my contact information is in the manual. So have a great rest of your day.